The following program is a production of the Southern University Mass Communication Department.
Intriguing. Inspirational. Unique. Welcome to the Paris with the D show. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to the Paris with the D show. You could have been tuned into any other channel on your television, but instead you decided to be here with me. And for that, I am truly thankful. Margaret Mead once said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And with my next guest's dedication to Baton Rouge, she is indeed doing just that. Blair Brown is a 21-year-old LSU student whose main goal has been to inspire the community to make power moves within Baton Rouge. And she has led the restoration of a prominent African-American museum right in downtown. She has helped organize equality marches for the LGBTQ community and women's rights alike. She has also created and is in charge of two campaigns, HER, which is Health Education Rights for Women, and BRO, Baton Rouge Organizing. Beautiful people, please give it up for Miss Blair Brown. Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So let's get right into the questions. When did you know that activism was your calling?
So I'd always been, really fascinated with the civil rights movement from a very young age. And my, favorite book growing up was If a Bus Could Talk. And it's a story about Rosa Parks. This young girl sits on a bus and the bus starts talking to her about the story of Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
And so, kind of with that knowledge and that kind of fascination, that was like what I was like most interested in. I had always aspired to be an activist, so I didn't know what that would really look like. But I definitely say, from a very young age, like maybe even as young as 7, I want to be Angela Davis,
So do you have any like family members that were actually in the struggle in the 60s, 70s?
Well, I do have family members that, were in the Black Panther movement. But I grew up, with my neighbors being people who had moved to LA after or, during the civil rights movement to kind of get away from all of the, issues that were institutionalized issues that were going on in the South. So I grew up, speaking to and like learning from Terrence Roberts, who was one of the Little Rock Nine, who integrated the schools after the Brown versus Board case. So when I saw him in my textbook and I had seen him as such a familiar face, I went to him and I was like, "This is you, like what happened? Like tell me." So I did an interview with him when I was like, I think 12 years old.
Yeah.
So I'd always been around activists, and I never really thought of it as being activist. I just thought that that was something you did. You stood up for what you believed in, and you, tried to work towards justice.
Okay. So you're from California, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. What part are you from?
I'm from the Pasadena area.
All right. SoCal, I love it. So was there a change, or excuse me, did you have to transition here when you came? Was it big for you?
Oh yeah, it was definitely, very different. The first thing is, people are very friendly here. They people talk to each other, people wave at you when you're going
Southern
down the street.
hospitality.
Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'd be driving around in, the Baton Rouge area and people would just wave to me and I definitely didn't know them being from California.
Right.
So I'd be like, is there something wrong? Like there were a couple times where I remember like slowing my car down and actually like asking. So that was a little embarrassing.
Did you decide on Baton Rouge? What was the big deal with that?
So
do you have like roots here or anything?
Well, actually, my great grandfather went to Southern.
All right,
so
Jax.
That was, it was really awesome. And when I go to LSU, and I'd been coming to New Orleans actually every summer since I was, I think, in 8th grade, and in middle school. And so I'd been coming for summer camps, and we were touring colleges. Mm-hmm. And when I came and I saw LSU, like there's a live tiger. Like I was like, oh, that's awesome. And the people were very nice there. And I unfortunately didn't know as much about other parts of the community, like Southern, for example. Mm-hmm. So I really just kind of decided that I wanted to have a little bit of fun, like go to the football games and stuff. But I didn't really take into consideration all of the stuff that I'm now doing. Like I didn't project that I would have been, you know, an activist. I just thought I was going to go to college, maybe join a sorority.
Right,
you know?
right. Okay, so one of my burning questions, because you are an activist and you are so deeply rooted in the African American dream, why not Southern? Why not an HBCU for this?
I had applied to Howard, actually, and, you know, I had gotten a scholarship there, and for some reason it just didn't, you know, happen. I just didn't, you know, make that decision. I think because my mom, you know, is in New Orleans frequently. I see her, you know, every other month for like a week or so. And because we already had like a family here and a community here, I felt more comfortable staying here. And like I said, I didn't know about Southern, and that would have been like the best of both worlds. But I am going to be going to Howard for law school.
There we go.
I'm really excited to, you know, be able to be in a space where, you know, it is for us.
Yes.
So that's going to be, you know, a great experience.
Okay, so actually taking it back to LSU, do you think, like in your opinion, going there, do you think that it is lacking in some places for the African American community?
Oh, absolutely. And I've been, you know, very vocal about this, you know, type of thing. I was on a panel recently about the African American student experience at LSU, and something that I had been, you know, like repeating throughout the panel was that this space was initially set up with, you know, specific restrictions against having black students on campus. Well, you know, until 1961 when it was desegregated, and even you know, like moving well on into even present day, there are still kind of barriers that aren't really broken down or discussed even. So one of the things that was brought up at that panel was that there is this kind of like realization of your blackness and what that means at LSU. You know, I'd grown up like with no delusions about not, you know, about being black. Like I was like, I, you know my culture, I know my people, and I would still, you know, say that was true when I came to LSU, but I wasn't aware of the implications. So, you know, learning about that and having that type of support system exists at LSU through like the Black Student Union. Now we have an African American Center on campus. There's the Office of Multicultural Affairs. But one thing that I do see frequently is that a lot of administrators, maybe just by virtue of not having the, you know, awareness or exposure that that they may need to facilitate these things, is that oftentimes people will, you know, well, that's something that the African American Center should deal with. That's something that the Office of Multicultural Affairs should deal with. So, you know, I really feel that if we're going to have a community, we shouldn't just have the people who would be traditionally expected to champion a cause to champion that cause. So I've been very vocal about
everybody's issue.
Absolutely, like talking about, you know, African American history, not just in African American studies, but in American history, because we, you know, exist and we've influenced so much of our American history. And like I've learned at the museum, that I'm sure we'll talk about later, I've really realized that if we don't know about each other, we're never going to progress, because if we're taught that, you know, we only existed in slavery, then we were gone, obviously, and then we show back up in the 60s, we're not going to have an understanding, because we know about all of these different heroes and influential people who are white, but we don't know any of those people who are, you know, minorities. So then how can we conceptualize that black people can be successful, that we, you know, are an educated people with a culture and legitimacy? So that can't happen unless we, you know, start incorporating those, and not just like in a way that's to ameliorate the situation, but in a very genuine and with as much gusto as you would, you know, discuss other aspects of history.
Of course, of course. So your plan is to actually go into law school, right? We're going to Howard?
Yes.
So what do you plan on doing with that?
So I really want to do international law. With my organization, Equality for Her, I've been able to work with a lot of different groups, you know, abroad. I'm working with a woman in Karachi, Pakistan, and I'm learning about the experience of women there. You know, we're kind of taught that there's one type of, you know, experience, and as far as it's concerned with, you know, like the Middle East and Eastern countries, you know, it's very oppressive, no such thing as like feminism, and I'm really learning that that is not the case, and that there are nuances to every person's experience, you know, like even in America. And so I've also worked with groups in Lagos, Nigeria, London, and I'm just really realizing that there's a common thread that runs through all of us, you know, and we can all empower each other. So I think through international law, I think through international law, we can definitely bring together, our community. And I do have aspirations of maybe working for the UN one day. And I think that would be really awesome to, bring advocacy of all groups to, fruition.
Okay, so let's get started in talking about your two organizations, Her and Bro. You didn't do that on purpose.
Not at all.
No, okay. So let's talk about Her. What was the reasoning for finding Her in the first place?
So I founded Equality for Her because, when you mention feminism, the thing that comes to mind, or like the person, is often a middle-class white woman. And that is, absolutely not true. There are empowered and strong women in all cultures. And I didn't really feel like that was being expressed through, the available campus organizations, at LSU and in the surrounding community. And, growing up with my mom, who was, she was the dominant one in the family, not to say that, not to put any shame on my dad or anything. It's just they were very, equal, and oftentimes my mom would make decisions. And I feel like that's very true amongst my peers. And so I felt like that wasn't being expressed. And so between that, the narrative that women can't, also, have children and be in the workforce, the narrative that LGBT people and women have conflicts of interest, that we can't work together, that I felt was problematic. So I, of course, first looked, in the community, looked online quite extensively to try to find an organization that encompassed these types of things. And I wasn't really satisfied. So I thought, what better way, if you have a goal or a mission or a purpose to, try to make that happen yourself. So I founded Equality for Her January 2014. So it's been going really strong, and I'm really proud of it.
So who do you actually want to identify with Her? Is it just, the minority, or can everybody?
Well, that's a
identify?
really big thing, is intersectionality, so I'm not just a woman, I'm not just a Black person, I'm not just, Puerto Rican, I'm not just, mixed, or, so all my different identities. And with even the pronoun her, it stands for health, education, and rights. It's women's empowerment, but you get into the details of what it means to be a woman. Being a woman isn't having long hair. Being a woman isn't conforming to, the traditional roles that society puts on us. But it's also choosing those roles if you want that to be the case. There was an article that came out right around the time when I founded the organization that said, I sometimes take a break from being a feminist and watch Say Yes to the Dress. And I'm like, you can do both, absolutely. You can get married, you can have a relationship. You can also not do those things. You can be an LGBT person and be a feminist. You can be a man and be a feminist. And I felt like the word feminist was the thing that was blocking people from doing that. So I wanted to bring in the two camps of people who identify as feminists, the people who feel like that's a stigmatized term, and kind of jump over that hurdle and bring everyone together.
There we go.
So I really want it to be a space, and I think it has been a space where everyone feels secure, feels empowered, and feels included.
Okay, so how do you think Hers has affected Baton Rouge? Do you do it just in the Baton Rouge community, or?
So that's been the amazing thing. I started it, maybe it'll be an on-campus organization, maybe I'll do this for maybe it won't even work, but I've been able to work with people in Lafayette. So for Women's History Month, which is March, which I learned about, I think, maybe a month before I started the organization, we have a whole month. That's awesome. So I'm going to be doing a couple of different events there. We also have an online campaign. And then being able to influence, from Baton Rouge, the experiences of people in Nigeria, in, England, in Pakistan. And so we're going to be, doing things to highlight women who, from Arabic speaking countries, and, talk about how they're not just this one, monolith of oppressed peoples. No, much the contrary. In places like Tunisia, women often outnumber the men in STEM fields, and that's something that we're, working on in America. So, we've been able to do those types of things, bring light to different experiences, and so it's just been really great. But in Baton Rouge specifically, I was speaking about, or I wrote about on the website, my healing process from being a survivor of sexual assault. And that was something that I just felt like it could help people. Maybe I'll put it out there, and I'm a strong believer in the ideology that if you talk about something more, people will be less afraid to talk about it.
Yeah.
So my friend messaged me on Facebook after I, published it, maybe like a week after. And she said, "Thank you so much for writing that. You really inspired me to get therapy." And so it's been, I didn't intend for that to happen, but it's been kind of a beautiful thing that's come out of it.
That is beautiful.
So it's had all these like unintended results and consequences in the positive way. So it's been really great.
That is really good. Okay, so one of the questions that we want to touch on, you said that the LGBTQ community is really big in her. Do you think that homophobia actually affects the Black community?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it affects, unfortunately affects a lot of communities.
Right.
But, specifically in the Black community, being a person of color and, growing up with my brother who's, a gay Black man and dealing with, masculinity and femininity. That's something that's like so inherent to being a Black person in America is, this fine line where women, actually men and women Black men and women are expected to be strong, kind of not emotionally vulnerable, kind of these unfeeling people unless it's happiness or anger. And that is definitely not the case because we're people with the same, emotional spectrum as any other culture.
Right.
So I think with, homophobia in the Black community, it's especially problematic because we've been the people who have been oppressed in America for so long. And for us to, not stand right with people, at the same time, like I said with intersectionality, to, stand with people when they're fighting for their rights.
Right.
And even when we don't identify with those rights, and even if, we do.
Exactly.
Because if we can't stand up for all oppressed people, I think that it, it's, a shame, but it's also kind of a delegitimization of our, rights, because for so long people have said the same things about us. So not to say that we're done fighting for, racial equality,
right?
But to include, I call it selective activism, to not be selective on things that you just identify with.
It should be everybody.
Absolutely.
Okay. So now let's talk about BR Organizing. Oh my gosh, I love them. I follow them, or you, excuse me, on Instagram. That's how we actually met, was through one of your posts that you wrote on the African American Museum. So how did you get involved with BRO? How did you find BRO? So
it came out of a candlelight vigil that we had for, when the decision came down out of Ferguson about, the no indictment. We kind of organized something very quickly, I and Peter Jenkins, candlelight vigil to kind of honor the lives that have been lost and acknowledge that this has happened. And it was such a struggle to even do. So we planned it, I think it was maybe less than 24 hours that we did it, maybe 22 hours, to mobilize, find a space, and then also convince people that this is something legitimate,
right?
On a predominantly white institution's campus, that that we're not doing anything wrong by acknowledging these things. No, there's not going to be any consequences,
right?
Where it's a vigil, it's not like people were actually speaking that there might be riots, and so it was just kind of ludicrous. And so, long story short, so we end up having the vigil, and it goes, very great, and we're, all kind of feeling very unified, and we have people from members of the Black community, white, all these different, groups coming together. And then my co-founder, Shameka, she got up when we called the community to come speak, and she said, "This can't be all we do. We have to keep this moving. We can't just come and mourn every time something happens. We have to work in the community, run for office, vote, get involved.
To prevent this.
Absolutely, to prevent this, and to do that in a systematic way.
Right.
So Baton Rouge Organizing became that way. As she said this, I was, I love technology. I was just sitting on my iPhone making the a group on Facebook, inviting everybody I knew who was at the event.
Okay.
And it just kind of snowballed from there.
Yes, it's gotten really big. Like I said, I followed you on Instagram. It's pretty amazing. So what is actually your purpose for the African American Museum? That's how we met in the first place. We're restoring it right now, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about that. And Miss Roberts, oh my God, she's so cute.
Oh yeah, so I met Miss Roberts, I was immersed in activism, I think, all last semester. and even now. But I met her at the event with John Lewis and Andrew Aiden when they came to speak about their book, March. And we talked about, I saw her, she had her, Afrocentric dress on. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go speak to her. And she gave me her card and said, curator and founder of the Odell S. Williams Now and Then African American Museum. And I said, we have an African American museum in Baton Rouge.
Right.
And I was really upset at myself for not knowing this. And so the week before finals, she called me and I went to the museum to visit her. And we just started, talking about family and, spirituality and all these different things and the importance of education and like influencing and improving race relations. And so she's really been able I've been able to work with her, and she's given me grace and being able to trust me to have the best interests of the museum in mind and to kind of launch these mini social media campaigns to get people to come out and support this important part of the community.
It is. They have a bus and everything. Okay, so there is a very controversial topic right now. We've already touched on it a little bit with the Mike Brown case, but what people don't know is that it's actually happening in Baton Rouge as well with Victor White, right? You had the chance to meet his parents and the parents of Tillman?
Oh, yes, Cameron Tillman.
Cameron Tillman. Okay, can you tell me a little bit about that experience?
Absolutely. So it's actually happening, it could be happening in Baton Rouge, we're not aware of it, but it's definitely happening in New Iberia and in Homa. New Iberia, this young man, his name was Victor White III, and he was frisked twice, stopped by police officers, in the unfortunate traditional manner.
Right.
And he, at some point during the transport of him to the holding cell, the press release said that he had shot himself in the chest. However, he was handcuffed behind himself.
Right.
So they initially said that the shot wound was from the back, so that would make a little bit more logical. And,
I don't know. Yeah, not if you're
sense.
handcuffed this way.
Absolutely.
That doesn't make any sense.
So, and then there was a press release shortly thereafter that said that he was shot in the chest. So that absolutely makes zero sense.
Yes.
So it's been called, the Houdini handcuff killings. And so I had been studying this case and a number of other cases, and I met his father. I was like, oh, nice to meet you. I introduced myself to people. It's a kind of a serial networker. It's a problem. Right. But this time it worked, And he said, I'm Reverend Victor White Sr. And I was like, that name's familiar. And then his son looks so much like him, so I felt like I almost recognized him. And, we just kind of made that connection. And I wanted them not to be trampled on like so many families are.
Yes.
I didn't want it to be the case where, people are critical of figures like Al Sharpton for not taking the family's interests in mind. So I've really tried to advocate for them and work with them. And shortly thereafter, we had a rally, a Black Lives Matter rally, where I wanted people to hear the voices of these families that are affected, because when you take family out of it, it's not so harmful. That's with anything. If you dehumanize something, it makes it easier to continue. So
ignore it.
He and Waitika Tillman discussed, how their families have been dealing with the loss of their sons as a result of this institutional problem. So it's been, a really sad thing, but it's been kind of a blessing in disguise because we've been able to bring more light.
Okay. So I actually want to end it with this question. I actually have some experience with it as well. But as a biracial woman, do you feel that you are fully accepted by your community?
So I think that, requires defining what your community is. And I think that's one of the great things about the fabric of America, is that there isn't just one Black experience, not just one white, not just one Mexican or female or male experience. And so while, oftentimes you're not, growing up I wasn't, Black enough for the Black community or white enough for the white community, it really made me, be more confident in myself, because, with anything, if you're not comfortable with yourself and you're relying on a community to accept you, that's going to be very fickle and flimsy for when, that community doesn't accept you and ostracizes you. So that's with any person in any experience. So, sometimes I feel included and sometimes I don't. But I think either way, I've been blessed to, be who I am, like be what I'm and do what I'm doing. Yeah. So I guess that's not really an answer, but
no, it's perfect, and I think you have been a blessing to the Baton Rouge community. Thank you so much for coming to the show, stopping by. And people, this is Blair Brown. You have to get involved with her and Bro. I know I'm using the acronyms, but you can definitely find them on my page. The last thing is, what do you have with her and Bro to actually, with events coming up?
Oh, absolutely. So if you go to equalityforher.com, you can see our Women's History Month campaign that we're going to be launching on March 1st.
Okay.
As well as with Bro, we're going to be delivering the petition very soon to the coroner's office to change the the cause of death from suicide to homicide, which is very important to the family and very important to, upholding justice.
Right.
So we're going to be doing those two things, but definitely keep up with Bro on brorganizing.com and equalityforher.com. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Blair, for coming by. I appreciate it. You've been amazing
thank you.
And inspirational. Thank you.
I'm glad.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Blair, for being on the show today. Ladies and gentlemen, if you were looking for a way to get involved with helping your community, this is definitely the way. Visit Health Education Rights at equalityforher.com and Baton Rouge Organizing at brorganizing.com to see the upcoming events. Thanks again so much for tuning in to the Paris with the D show. If you have any feedback or comments, please hashtag the Paris with the D show. And until next time, stay true.
The preceding program was brought to you by the Southern University Mass Communication Department.